The two strangest things about the crash of Air India Flight 171 are the when and the how. First, the timing. It was almost immediately after takeoff, while the plane was still trying to climb. I'll show that to you. But then, look at how the plane crashed. That gradual and, to untrained eyes, almost a controlled descent. It looks more like a landing than a crash, until the terribly large explosion. Smoke and fire filling the air.
Thick black smoke could be seen billowing from the wreckage.
It was carrying 242 people. India's home minister says there is a sole survivor.
There's a lot we know, but even more we don't. So let's tackle those in order, starting with takeoff. We'll start zoomed out, and I'll show you more and more detail as we go. India, the western part of the country in Gujarat, the city of Ahmedabad, and this is where we find the international airport, where Air India Flight 171 took off. There's nothing unusual about any of that. This flight takes off almost every single day. Ahmedabad to London, call it around a 10-hour flight. Except we can see from online flight tracking that this flight on this day, June 12th, around 1:38 p.m. local time, it would taxi onto the main runway facing southwest. But here is where we lose the signal, apparently at 625 feet, just at the edge of the runway. The flight would last somewhere around, maybe even under 1 minute.
A packed Air India plane bound for England crashing on takeoff.
We can see from photos like this from India's Central Police Force, the site of the crash. Now, take a look at this video, one of many posted online. This was posted immediately after the crash. Now, this is a slightly different vantage point. The buildings look kind of similar, but it's different. But I can also find this spot for you, because if you look here at the bottom left corner, and I'll zoom in a little bit here, you can see this graffiti, this orange half circle, but also the blue text just beneath it. So that is roughly this spot here on Google Street View. We can see this graffiti is exactly the same. I've checked, I've looked very closely. But I'm thinking roughly this vantage point is where that video was taken. The plane crashing just beyond this wall, just beyond this set of buildings, into the buildings behind that we showed you in the photo. The reason I'm showing you all of this is for three reasons, actually. One, so that you can check my work, if you like. Two, to explain why we don't know how many people died. There were, authorities say, 242 people on board that plane. But how many were on the ground in any of these buildings in the middle of a residential area? But reason number three, I show you to remind you how close this was to the airport. The distance from the crash site to the edge of the runway, that's about 1.5 kilometers. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which this plane was, could conceivably have covered that distance at takeoff speeds in 30 seconds. So whatever caused this plane to crash, presumably wasn't detected during pre-flight checks, didn't appear to interfere with the takeoff itself, but then doomed the plane almost immediately. When an investigator arrives at the scene of a plane crash, there's a whole list of possible explanations that'll run through their heads.
Weather, bird strike, engine failure, fuel supply issue, human error, which hopefully isn't the problem, debris on the runway, for example.
But right away, there are theories that, if we can't quite rule out, we can imagine are among the less likely. For example, there's no evidence at all right now suggesting that this was some kind of attack from outside the plane. There's no war here, no rockets flying. And the weather at the time of the crash, again, nothing obviously unusual. No heavy rain, snow, or reduced visibility. When I look up the registration of this particular plane, I see the year of manufacture, built in 2013. That makes the plane only a little over 10 years old, which isn't old.
11 years old is really not a very old aeroplane at all. So although you would want to make sure that there were no maintenance or technical issues with this specific aeroplane, actually this is the most modern technology that you would expect to fly on.
But then I keep coming back to the way this plane crashed. Again, that slow descent. What can we read into that?
What you see is less of a controlled descent and more trying to keep the aircraft in the best possible position for it to accelerate and to climb. So keeping the wings level, particularly at such a low altitude. But once that aircraft's got to the speed where it takes off from the runway, then we're dependent on things like the flaps, which are a part of the wing that helps it to generate lift as it accelerates through the air and climbs. If those flaps, for example, were not in the right position, or had retracted for some reason, then the aircraft would be perhaps struggling to climb just because it couldn't generate enough lift.
When you look at it close, you can see the nose of the aircraft. It's actually pitching up, which means the pilot is trying to get the aircraft into a climb, but then there wasn't sufficient speed and or engine power to sustain the climb. When you don't have enough lift, it wants to go towards the ground.
And this is where we start to veer a bit dangerously into the realm of speculation, because investigations on this scale can tend to take months, if not years, and until they've done the work, analyzing audio recordings, black box data, interviewing witnesses, understanding the plane's maintenance history, it'll be hard to know why the plane couldn't seem to generate enough lift to climb the way it was supposed to. These planes are built with many redundancies and to withstand malfunction.
The thing to remember is an aircraft like this has two large engines, either of which is capable of supporting that aircraft to fly safely. So we would design that aircraft that even if it had an engine failure at the most critical stage of takeoff, that the other engine is enough for it to climb away. So really for an aircraft to be descending in that way, you'd be looking at either both engines failing or a different explanation as to why it was in that situation.
They're also well equipped to deal with things like bird strikes.
Even a bird strike is something that modern jet engines are designed to withstand. When an aircraft engine is certified, we want to test that its design can withstand some of the hazards that it might experience.
Meanwhile, Boeing, the makers of the Dreamliner 787 that just crashed, they've got problems.
Boeing shares lower after an Air India Boeing 787 Dreamliner crashed shortly after takeoff on Thursday.
Experts all told us this particular plane, to anyone's knowledge, is safe, state of the art, and with no record at all of any fatalities until now. But Boeing, as a company, its planes have made headlines, including when a door plug on an Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 completely blew out. In midair, full slate of passengers on board, forcing an emergency landing. After this latest crash, the company will desperately want to know what happened.
Definitely, they are going to take a hit, image-wise, in terms of investor confidence. But we should still have confidence in this aircraft manufacturer. They've been around for some time. They're competing against Airbus, and their aircraft are highly reliable.
So now we wait for details of the crash, but also for such grim things as the number of casualties. The immediate reaction of India's Prime Minister that what happened is heartbreaking beyond words.